So, um, there's a lot to say about the Shen. This is a big topic in the context of Taoist medicine, and so I'm going to do my best to be concise, which is most definitely not my strong suit. Um, they say brevity is the soul of wit. I lack both brevity and wit. I'm okay on soul, doing all right there. Uh, so because it's a big topic, I also am going to refer to some notes because for those of you who've come to these talks before, I can wander off in all sorts of crazy directions, and before you know it, God knows what we'll be talking about. So I'm going to refer back to one of the tea clubs I wrote from 2020. And if you want to do a deep dive on any one of the elements, we're in our sixth year now with the Tea Club, and we post all the previous Tea Clubs in the blog on Living Tea. And, each of them for every season is really distinct, and I kind of do a deep dive into some specific aspect of the element. Um, so I wanted to refer to this one in particular because it really is about the Shen, which I think is the most relevant. I'm going to talk a little bit about diet and some lifestyle stuff, but what's really most important is how do you nourish and cultivate the seat of your wisdom during the season. So, you know, what we see at this time of year is the awakening of all plant and animal life on Earth. It's the time of the most fertility and vitality on planet Earth. And with the eruption of life in the spring, that becomes the foundation for this transition into summer. So the wood energy of the spring is about birth, whereas the summer, the fire energy, is about growth and transformation. So we understand that during this time of year, what's called the vapor of yang, so we talk about yin and yang, right? Everybody's seen the Tai Chi symbol. The vapor of yang descends down into the earth, and the heat, you could think of that if you want it in more practical terms, the heat from the sun descends down into the earth and it allows everything to ripen into maturity. So, um, this transition really in the Chinese lunar calendar or the agricultural calendar is marked. The beginning of summer is May 6th. And then as we pass over the summer solstice, which was 2 days ago, we say the yin begins to rise and the yang descends all the way into the earth. So when the yang descends, then we find this flowering of all life. And if you live in a place where you are able to get out into the forest or you're spending more time in the natural world, what you'll observe is over the next 3 weeks to a month, all the flowers start to come out and all of the buds on the fruiting plants, so all the berries and strawberries, blueberries, whatever is growing naturally or wildly, will start to emerge. And that is the expression in nature of this yang energy having reached its descent, and where yang and yin meet, we have the most vital or creative energy. So, you could put this in a lot of different terms, but essentially what it's saying is that when yin and yang are at their transition moments, are the most fertile. I'm not going to get into human beings interaction. You can probably do that math in your head. But what we're talking about is a very potent moment in nature. So in the Taoist calendar, these transitional moments, the equinoxes and the solstices, are very important times to try to work with the energy because they say the veil is thin or those energies are really available. So we can do that through diet, we can do it through the types of teas we drink, we can do it just by taking some space for mindfulness of what's happening in the natural world during those times. Um, you know, so it's when we see the growth of grains, when stalks appear, all the hydrating fruits in nature, because it's the dry time of year, or we're starting to move into the dry time of the year. In nature, all the fruits begin to mature on the trees, right? So there is this communication and interaction with the natural world. Um, a lot of the animals give birth at this time. The deer start to grow their antlers, and um, we begin to see the very first signs of decay in nature. So the first signs of the autumn. Now, the other piece is that the really strong yang fire element at this time of year, it begins to increase. And so there's the risk of the fires. So for those of you who live in California, we start to, if you were working in the forest services, you would start to prepare for the risks of like conflagration that come at the end of the summer. And all of this, again, is about this interaction of the elements. As things get hot, they get dry. As they get dry, there's more susceptibility to the possibility of actual literal fire happening, right, in the late summer. So when we're following the way of tea, we're really following a natural way of life that's about observing and embracing the balance between these elements in each season. This is how we cultivate wisdom, and it's the source for longevity and really vibrant chi or prana or life force or whatever you want to call it throughout each of the seasons. So there are these subtle shifts in the way that we manage our internal and exterior lives. So this time is about verdant abundance and growth. And it's a time, a way to think about it is we have all that we need, right? Nature is full of this profound expression of abundance. It's also the time that humans connect, right? So there's a ton of social activities, people stay out later at night. There's a lot going on generally in our social lives. And in terms of balancing yin and yang from a Taoist perspective, when there's this abundance and growth in nature, it's a time to simplify and live with modesty in our interior lives. And so reducing desires and finding contentment in the subtle enjoyment of life's abundance. So it's a time to not go out and consume a ton and do a ton, but rather to just enjoy the simple abundance of nature, which means reducing craving, desire, and this tendency to over consume, right? So we spend more time outside, and we cultivate this energy through our interactions with the natural world. If you've cultivated some sensitivity in your awareness, you can go sit in a forest or a natural environment right now and allow all the information to come in. And that type of stimulation is very, very nourishing to the Shen, as opposed to artificial stimulation, right? Or people tend to be more social during this time of year, which often means overconsumption of alcohol or food or stimulation through like music and that kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with, say, music or things in moderation, but because the social environment is hyperstimulating, it's a time to be more mindful of reducing our own desires and resting in modesty. And in the I Ching, modesty means like enjoying life's abundance without overconsumption. Okay, so I'm not going to over emphasize that point, but I think it all kind of makes sense. So there's this tendency culturally, just to finish that thought, to overindulge, to be excessive, and to be kind of scheming. And I think intuitively we understand that simplicity and moderation are the keys to longevity, health, and happiness. And so during this time of year, really exploring your relationship to consumption and to your social dynamics and your social relationships, the health of your relationships, is really essential, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. So, so during the summer, we tend to shift the types of teas we're drinking. So we're drinking a white tea today, uh, and as I was just talking about these practices of moderation, they're expressed through economy of movement and of lesser quantities of tea and smaller cups, and they're sweet and kind of ethereal, and um, we appreciate the aroma of like oolongs and white teas and green teas, and those the aroma in particular is symbolic of this burgeoning of life that we find in the natural world, um, or of how the floral, all of the flowers are coming out, and there's this ripening of fruit that we see in the summer. So we tend towards these sweet, aromatic, floral, fruity, um, lighter teas. The expression of moderation is through the smaller leaf amount. So we're brewing gong fu in smaller pots, instead of say side handle or boiled tea. So I tend to drink a lot of gong fu tea in the summer. Or another expression of that kind of moderation and simplicity is just a couple leaves in a bowl, like getting out into the natural world if you can, and just brewing a couple leaves in a bowl, maybe gathering water from a stream or a river, and preparing tea really simply. It's this reminder of all of life is so full in the summer. How can we simplify our internal environment to balance it and to let it in, is a way of putting it. So some of the types of teas, when I really want to drink an earthier tea in the summer, I'll drink a Liu Bao, which is like true black tea. We have a couple really nice Liu Baos coming here from Malaysia right now, but we also have some on the website. Liu Bao has a cooling effect on the body. And so when it's really hot outside, when you're balancing it, you want to drink teas that are cooling. The most cooling teas you could drink are green tea and Liu Bao black tea, but also young Shengpu. Sometimes people, if they're newer to tea, they don't like young Shengpu because they find it bitter. But the flavor of bitter is something that you develop an appreciation for over time as you drink tea, because for most Westerners, the idea of bitterness is like dark chocolate, but it's got sugar and other things in it. It's like sugar and toffee and almonds. And you're like, that's not bitter. That's just sugar and toffee and almonds with some chocolate. Or we might think of like greens, the bitter greens, which are very good in the summer. Um, but again, or coffee. But again, for most of the quote bitter things that Westerners consume, we add a bunch of things to make it not really bitter. Whereas as you appreciate and drink tea, you develop an appreciation for bitter as one of the five flavors. And, um, bitter. I had a teacher at one time say to me, you should drink more. Or he said, the most important tea to drink is bitter tea. And I said, well, why? And he said, because the door to wisdom is hard to open. You push too hard and you get hardship. You don't push at all and it doesn't open. And I was like, what are we talking about right now? And when I sat with that teaching, what he was saying is that the reason bitter tea is so important is that we have a tendency to avoid discomfort, to avoid inconvenience, to avoid difficulty in life, and to always move towards what seems easier, what seems more convenient, what feels good. And often, in fact, the path of growth is towards what is more difficult. It's having the hard conversation. It's looking at your shit. It's the willingness to be in front of things that are unpleasant and not try to hide from them. And so that was one of the interpretations I had of when he said bitter tea is the most important. So, anyways, do with that what you will. But we tend to drink these Liu Bao black teas in the summer because they clear heat from the body. Young Shengpu. Also, there tends to be an accumulation of damp heat in the body. This is from Chinese medicine. So the bitter flavor transforms damp and it clears heat. So it helps to balance the natural physiological effects of the climate in the summer. Um, and then we also drink like sencha, which is a type of Japanese green tea, white teas like we're having this morning, yellow tea, which is a category a lot of people. It's hard to find good organic yellow tea, but if you ever do, it's really nice. It's just hard to find. And then we tend to drink lighter red teas, so lightly oxidized red teas at this time of year. And then for really active days, if you know you're going to be out doing a lot, matcha is wonderful because matcha's, like rocket fuel. Matcha tends to be quite stimulating because it has a lot of caffeine. You're consuming the entire leaf instead of decocting or creating an infusion of the leaves. Um, and sometimes lightly oxidized red teas are nice because they can be a little more caffeinated if you're going to be have a very full day, right? But the general takeaway is more floral, burgeoning, bright, light, um, um, sweet, aromatic, fruity teas are generally more appropriate, or bitter teas to clear some of the heat from the body. So those are just some things to kind of consider in the types of teas that you're choosing in the season. We've tried to organize this at Living Tea. There's a whole section on the website that's around summer teas. So I kind of curated what I felt were really nice teas for this time of year if you want some guidance on that. Okay, let's jump into the deep stuff. Let me pour a cup of tea here first. All right. So, when we talk about the fire element, we're really talking about the Shen. And the Shen in the human body is the foundation for joy. It's also the basis of excitation. Um, and there's different types of excitation. One comes from stimulation, and one comes from deep levels of nourishment, contentedness, and presence. Um, it's also the foundation for our social bonds, for the clarity of our thought, for it's the foundation for consciousness and insight and memory. So, for example, reishi mushrooms, which I'm sure most of you have heard about, reishi mushrooms are said to nourish the heart shen. And there was a period in China, which was a golden age, and it was a flowering of culture in Chinese culture. And all of the, not all, but many of the scroll paintings you see during that period, when you look at the clouds, there are little stems, and they were said to be reishi mushrooms. And they were symbolic of this quality of wisdom and the flowering of insight, consciousness, and awareness, intelligence. And at that during that time, it was actually illegal to have the fruiting body. You could keep the stalks, but you couldn't keep the fruiting body of reishi mushrooms, like commoners couldn't. And from what I've read, if you were found to have the fruiting bodies in your home, they would cut off your hands. And so, part of why they say the aristocracy, there was this huge flowering of cultures because people were consuming huge amounts of this Shen tonic, this mushroom. And, tea is considered a Shen tonic. And all of the early Chinese pharmacopoeia, tea is referred to as a Shen tonic for brightening the eyes and opening the heart, essentially. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, but um, When we talk about the Shen, we're talking about the spirit of fire, and we're talking about the gifts of compassion and awareness. So, most indigenous cultures, most earth based traditions, spiritual traditions and practices, they don't believe that the seat of human consciousness is in the brain or the mind. It's not a thinking process. The seat of human wisdom and consciousness is actually in the heart. And they've like the Heart Math Institute and all these. There's been some really interesting cross comparative studies done by Tibetan Buddhists, and that the Dalai Lama spearheaded with like the Heart Math Institute and some Western scientific institutions to study the effects of meditation on both the heart and on the mind. And there are these extraordinary studies that show as the brain waves decrease, the electromagnetic field of the heart increases. And so, we all know that we have um, an electromagnetic field around the heart, but we have a capacity through the cultivation of stillness and openness and quieting discursive thinking to increase the capacity of the heart. And that's the seat of compassion and also the seat of connection to everything in the natural world. So when you connect with a star, you don't do it, you can do it by thinking about it. But it's not through the thinking process that we connect to other people or to the natural environment or to our own innate intelligence. It's through our capacity to be quiet in our minds, to go into the heart or into the Shen, and to open up that field of awareness to the environment we're in, that we actually connect with it. Thinking about something creates subject and object, whereas feeling something creates unity or empathy. And the deepest states of empathy are the ability, this is what you find in shamanic practice, to actually transfer your consciousness into other things, right? So the way that shamans do this work is they transfer the consciousness into a bird or an animal or a tree or a plant. The beginning of all herbalism was not by scientifically analyzing the biochemical constituents in plants. Herbalism existed a long time before, and it also wasn't trial and error. It wasn't like, well, we'll just walk around the forest and eat every plant and then try to figure out what it does. It was because of communication. There was a relationship between the natural environment and human beings. And we've lost a lot of that sensitivity in our modern age because of the hyper emphasis on the intelligence of thinking and analyzing and critiquing and breaking things apart, right? So, okay, this is why I need notes, because I will just go off on directions and we have no idea what we're talking about anymore. But all of this is related to the intelligence and the wisdom that comes from what you could call the feeling body and the astral body, as opposed to the mental body. So, um, the wisdom of the Shen, the different spirits that inhabit the organs, serve different motivational energies in our entire makeup, the intelligence of a human being's entire makeup. So the Shen, or the spirit that inhabits the heart, it knows how to simply be present. And this presence is necessary to maintain the virtue associated with the fire element, which is propriety or virtue. And so you might say, well, okay, the fire element is all about connection. It's about the fire that we feel, that excitement we feel when we see somebody we love, or somebody, or an old friend. That feeling that rises up of excitement when we think about something we're going to do, and we love it. So of course you talk about the heart, you talk about love, about joy, about excitement. So you might ask, well, what does that have to do with propriety and virtue? Like, how are these related? Without the presence that comes with the Shen staying in the heart, our unconscious beliefs or unconscious desires drive our actions and reactions. So, relationships, our relationship to one another, our relationship to friends, to lovers, to family, those relationships are the crucible upon which we work out the unconscious and unexplored parts of ourselves. So, you know, in some ways, and this is why in monastic environments or schools are necessary for spiritual work, because it's through our relationship that we come up against all our unexamined or unconscious parts of ourselves, right? I was having a conversation with a friend last night, and what she was observing was her relationships to these people who have wronged her in some way are the doorway through which she can see these parts of herself that she might not be able to see or access or understand unless for those difficult relationships, right? It's through our relationships that we see ourselves. And so it's how we learn virtue, it's how we learn propriety. If we were all sitting alone on an island, it would be easy to be virtuous in impropriety. You know, you can only get into so much trouble alone on an island, right? So it's really through our relationships that we not only understand ourselves, but that we see the unconscious parts of ourselves. So, there's a nice quote from Rilke. He says, "For one human being to love another, that is perhaps the most difficult of all of our tasks, the ultimate, the last test and proof, the work for which all other work is but preparation." And so when you talk about the Shen, we're talking about what does love really look like? What are relationships actually about? Um, and we're talking about the heart. So embryologically, when a child just first starts developing in the womb, the first organ that develops is the heart, and that extends then into the tongue. So the tongue grows out of the heart. And so when we talk about the Shen, we're also talking about speech, communication, language, and relationships, and how that communication and language is the foundation for relationships. I'm not going to go off on this tangent, but I'm going to say one thing, which is Yuval Harari, in talking about artificial intelligence, says artificial intelligence is hijacking the operating system of civilization, which is language. And the foundation in language for propriety, for virtue, and for healthy human relationships is so essential. Now, the speech organ of the tongue and the extension of the heart, this becomes the foundation for social bonds and social contracts. And what we see is somebody who has a really healthy Shen. They speak clearly, they say what they mean, they communicate their needs, they have healthy boundaries. And somebody who's got a healthy Shen, you can hear joy in their voice. So joy is the virtue of the heart, right? You can hear, oftentimes people with a healthy Shen are charismatic, and when they speak with clarity. Whereas somebody who has excess fire energy, when they speak, it's intense. It can be overwhelming. It can feel impulsive, and it feels a little bit like you want to just tell them to exhale and relax. So this comes out as like manic behavior. Oftentimes, people with excessive Shen or an unhealthy Shen, they need constant stimulation. Oftentimes, they're lascivious or promiscuous. If you're not stimulating them, they'll move on to the next person. They're often the person who's the life of the party, right? The social butterfly. So there's a healthy version of that, which is the ability to be present, but also have that enthusiasm or ebullience. And then there's the unhealthy version of it, which is manic, which is people who can't stop talking. They can't listen. They talk over everybody. They need constant stimulation, right? So, or in really unhealthy versions of it, they need constant sexual stimulation. So they're always in pursuit of the next relationship. They tend to be always hooking up with somebody and they get bored with that person quick. So they're on to the next person, right? So these are kind of versions just to give you kind of a sense of healthy versus unhealthy Shen, right? Or, we all know that person who's always touching, the real touchy people. And, like, again, there's a healthy version of we need physical human contact. We learned that during COVID. We go crazy when we don't hug each other, right? But then we know the person who's always got to be up in your business is always touch. Like, I think we all probably know this person, and we know when it's weird versus when it's healthy. Like the person who's always getting their hands on everybody, and you're kind of like, what is that about? You know, that's somebody who's got an unhealthy Shen, the need for constant physical contact. There's a lack of that propriety, right? Of that healthy relationship to boundaries, of like checking in before you put your hands on somebody, or of just knowing or feeling when it's appropriate, you know? Okay. So I wanted to give some context for this fire energy or the Shen in a general context, right? Now, let me go a little bit into some kind of like food or the theme of this talk was how to balance energy, yang energy in the summer. So I'm going to go into a couple tactics or some themes around this. Um, so we're now kind of moving into part three of this talk. Um, Hopefully, it's making sense. I'm not too all over the map. Um, all right. Let me brew a cup of tea. So I want to say one before I launch into like some lifestyle and dietary stuff. Um, from a Chinese medicine perspective, you know the old cliched saying, "The eyes are the window to the soul." We diagnose the health of somebody's Shen by looking in their eyes. So when I when I was seeing a lot of patients in LA, you can tell somebody who has a healthy Shen by the quality you see and feel in their eyes. So are their eyes clear? Do they hold eye contact? Is there stillness and presence in their eyes? Or are they averting the eyes? Do they feel uncomfortable when you make eye contact with them? Um, are they always looking around, which is too much fire, right? Always flitting around. Are they jumping from one topic to the other and they can't follow a line of thought or a thread of thought, right? This the vibrance and clarity in somebody's eyes is what tells you about their Shen. And if you really hold eye contact with somebody, you'll start to really what you start to see is the Shen coming out. Because what happens is when you make eye contact with somebody and you hold it, um, you start to drop into seeing each other kind of from like a soul to soul level. And that's how we diagnose the health of somebody's spirit or their Shen from a Chinese medicine perspective. Um, and, you know, the clarity of thinking, of consciousness, of insight, of memory, you can also see that in somebody's eyes, right? And so when you're diagnosing your own Shen, you can go look in your eyes in the mirror and let the mind settle, and then just like you're tuning into what is the state of what's my inner state like. When you hold that question while making eye contact, you start to tap into to the deeper intelligence of the heart, as a way of putting it. Here's the other side of it, and this is where tea is a Shen tonic. When it's said in the early Chinese pharmacopoeia, in the medical texts in Chinese herbalism, that tea brightens the eyes, it's talking more metaphorically than literally. So if we were talking literally, we'd be talking about the health of the liver blood. What it's talking about metaphorically is brightening the eyes means that a person whose Shen is healthy, vibrant, and present, is in the body, it means that there's clarity of the eyes in seeing your path. So what we're talking about really is having this understanding of when you make a decision, which decision is going to lend itself to your growth and which decision is aligned with your principles, your values, and the direction that the Tao wants to flow in your life. And this is why tea is a Shen tonic. Because if you create space in your life for meditation and tea, that Shen starts to find a place to land. And the reason that meditation and stillness practices are necessary for the Shen is it's pure fiery yang. It's fire. So its natural inclination is back to heaven. And heaven's considered yang, the earth is yin. So when there's not stillness in the heart, stillness in the mind, the Shen tends to leave. It wants to go up. When there's stillness and emptiness, what's called Wu, or Wu Wei is the practice in Chinese, in Taoist medicine. When there's emptiness and stillness, that spirit comes back down and inhabits the heart, and then you see clearly the path. So this is what it means that tea brightens the eyes. It opens the eyes to help you see the path in life, to see where you're going. Okay, that's kind of all I wanted to share on that. But the sense of purpose, direction, and awareness in life of what is my life path comes from the guiding light of the Shen. And this is only available through stillness, really. All right. So I'm going to get into into foods a little bit to help balance the Shen. If I can figure out where I put them. Here we go. All right. So, of course, the color associated with the fire element is red, which is symbolic of the blood, right? The heart pumps blood through the body, and the blood is really liquid consciousness. So the Shen lives in the blood, it lives in the heart. And the blood is the mother of our energy, the mother of the chi. The blood nourishes everything in the body. So without healthy blood, we can't have healthy chi or prana or life force. So the color red in red foods, so peppers, tomatoes, chili, radish, beets, red onions, these types of foods, which are really plentiful during the summer, they grow during the summer in great abundance, they nourish the heart. And, we also have fruits, strawberries, raspberries, watermelon, grape, cranberries, rhubarb pie, what's better? Apples. These types of foods, especially in their raw form, so we tend to eat a lot of raw food in the summer because raw food clears that heat from the body, and it's very hydrating and it's loaded with minerals, so it helps the electrical energy in the body run, right? These red foods, fruits and vegetables, are loaded with lycopene, which is what gives them that red. It gives the red pigmentation in food, and it's a carotenoid that is a very strong antioxidant. So it flushes the body of free radicals, which naturally reduces cardiovascular disease. So again, this is about heart health that we're talking about. So this antioxidant, lycopene, it's anti-cancerous. It helps address diabetes, osteoporosis, infertility, prostate cancer, and so when we're living in alignment with the seasons, we change our diet to support the organs and the energies of the season. So just trying to work a lot of red foods and a lot of raw food into your diet in the summer is very supportive of this. Also avoiding red food dye, what's called red 40, which is in a lot more things than we realize. You know, in children, we see a lot of ADHD and ADD. This hyper tendency towards aggression in modern culture is an excess fire condition. And a lot of the environmental toxins that we find in our foods, like glyphosate, but also things like red food dye, are contributing to these neurodegenerative states. So, of course, just avoiding processed food altogether is the ideal. And because nature is so abundant in raw foods that we can eat all summer, trying to incorporate a lot of that into your diet. Okay, the other thing I want to mention is bitter foods. So bitter foods are considered yin as opposed to yang. So that yin energy helps offset all the heat of the summer. So bitter foods clear heat. They're a little bit drying. So you don't want to eat tons of, you shouldn't just live on bitter greens. But we have things like romaine, chicory, dandelion root, tea. Just drink tea every day. It's bitter, right? Raw cacao or very dark chocolate. You know, all of these are going to support cardiovascular health and clearing heat from the body in the summer. Excess of heat, I'll just mention this because most of the things around diet that I'm interested in are around longevity. And too much heat in the body, or what you could call inflammation, right, causes cellular dehydration, which is the primary contributor to aging. So if you want to look young and you want to feel young and you want to maintain youthfulness, hydrating at the cellular level, so drinking a lot of water in the all year round, but especially in the summer because we lose more heat, and also balancing by eating bitter foods that clear some of that heat will help to maintain hydration, right? And also you want to support cardiovascular health, which nourishes the blood, which then nourishes the skin, right? These are beauty tips snuck into the middle of this talk here. Okay, the last thing I want to mention is that for heart and cardiovascular health, we're talking about omega-3 fatty acids, which probably most of you have heard about. So we find those in fish like salmon and mackerel. If you do eat fish, avoiding the larger fish because they're loaded with mercury and arsenic and other heavy metals. So smaller fish like mackerel and salmon. But if you want to avoid eating meat altogether, chia seeds, flax seeds, walnut, these are really good sources of omega-3 fatty acids. All right, I'm not going to go into like supplements and other things like that, but if you're really curious about diet, you can go back to those older blogs from the summer, Fire Elements, and there's like a deep dive into all of that. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about. The last thing I want to talk about is some questions that you can ask yourself to assess the health of your Shen and your relationship to the fire element. You know, in modern life, There's okay, so I want to recommend a couple books if you want to go deeper into the five elements. One of them is Plant Spirit Medicine by Elliot Cohen. It's more coming from a shamanic approach, but it's exploring the five elements. It's quite a profound book. The other one, if you want to get into more Taoist alchemical understanding, this is a little bit geared towards people who are deeper into Chinese medicine, but it's called The Five Spirits by Laurie Deschar. And another one is called The Way of the Five Elements by a guy named John Kirkwood. That's a very good resource for this. There are a lot of good sources on all of this, um, but some of what Elliot Cohen talks about in Plant Spirit Medicine is the way that we live in modern life, the ways in which modernity affect our ability to do spiritual work and to grow. And what he points out, which is I've thought about a lot, is the way that we are bombarded with external influences in modern life that insult this delicate Shen, the spirit. And, we're exposed to kind of crazy levels of violence, which shocks the Shen, it shocks the spirit through media and film. The pace of life is crazy. The stimulation that comes from technology and social media is very intense compared to our whole human history. Um, the endless sort of artificial glare of like neon lights and mechanical noise um, that comes in the technological age, it kind of cuts us off from the natural rhythms and sounds of nature. And so this the natural sound of like bird song or wind through the trees or insects buzzing or toads or cicadas at night, right? Um, we start to disconnect from all these things because we're surrounded by so much noise, and all of this affects the Shen. It affects the spirit and our ability to hear this kind of deeper wisdom. And when we're hyper stimulated in that way, we often subdue or numb ourselves because it's overwhelming for the Shen or the spirit. So we numb ourselves with, stimulants or, like we have an opioid epidemic, which I imagine most of you attending this talk are not, might not affect your life directly. But for a lot of people, it's a very real thing, right? This attempt to numb or to tone down or to um, disconnect, right? The other thing is that an unhealthy fire element, it manifests in our relationship, in our sexuality, in our intimacy in unhealthy ways, right? So you can kind of tune into, am I really cold and cut off from intimacy? Or do I have a hyper interest in it, right? I mean, I remember reading some statistic about like pornography on the internet, like that it takes up 70% or some crazy percent. I think it's like 70 or 75% of searches and internet use is for pornography. It was like some crazy number, like 70 and 80%. And what is that indicative of? That people are not, that fire element is not satisfied or nourished or held in a healthy way, right? And part of that is because we're bombarded with advertisements that use sexuality to sell everything from like cigarettes to coffee to electronics to potato chips to garden fertilizer. Every single thing where is subtly sold through sex, right? And so if people don't have a natural healthy relationship to this fire element, it's not surprising that 70% of internet use goes towards pornography, right? So The irony is that the more we consume, the emptier we feel, and then that cycle reinforces itself, right? So having a daily quiet tea practice, meditation, healthy, nourishing relationships, balancing out the energy through diet and movement and time in nature, all of this allows for a healthy Shen, which means that we can find healthy connection to all these things instead of empty consumption, then feeling emptier, and then consuming in more ways, and then getting stuck in these cycles of addiction and stimulation. People who have a really healthy Shen are not in unhealthy addiction cycles, right? Okay. So here are some questions that a person can connect with in their exploration of their own relationship to the Shen. Um, how often do you laugh? How easily do you laugh? You know, does laughter come easily, or is there a coldness in the Shen? Right? Um, are you constantly vacillating between hot and cold with people or decisions, or are you able to be constant and clear? Um, do you shy away from like spicy foods or vigorous exercise or the color red, or do you feel very comfortable with them? Right? So this is kind of like, are you cold or are you hot? Are you too hot? Are you too cold? That sort of thing, right? Do you feel passionate about your life or do you feel listless? Do you have fun? Are you full of joy or do you feel kind of cut off from that joy? Do you have healthy relationship to your sexuality in your relationships and your social life, or are you avoiding a social life? Do you feel bitter about what do you feel bitter about in life? Are you carrying that bitterness in life, or have you are you feeling more joyful? Right, knowing your relationship to those things. And then the last one is, do you feel open to receive love and to give love? And if not, how are you addressing your state of contraction? Because if you're not open to receiving love and to giving love, which can also manifest in healthy intimacy, that is indicative of the heart being closed or not feeling safe, right? So, ultimately, what we're talking about is our ability to access joy, but also having clarity around our path in life. In Taoist medicine, all of the spirits, what are called the Wu Shen, the five spirits, answer to the heart Shen. So it is, everything answers to the heart, right? It is the center and source of all of our joy, our consciousness, our connection, our human relationships, our wisdom, our purpose, our path. It is so essential. A healthy Shen is essential to living a full life. And during the summer, it's the fullness of the Shen. And so it's this time to really explore our relationship to all of that, right? Okay. There's a lot, because this is a big topic, we could go for a long time here, but I know that I've said a lot here. So hopefully I've given some good seeds for you to explore some of these topics in your own life around food and diet and practice and relationships and the state of your own Shen and your heart. And I want to open it up to questions